This is Breakfast with Dan Cox and Jenny Marchant on ABC Newcastle.
How far would you go to help your children get ahead in adult life? I know you do anything for them when they're tiny, but what about when they're actually adults? Would you consider helping them buy their first home?
Well, it's no secret that the cost of housing is going up. Young people are finding it hard to get into the property market. And you might have heard stories from within your family or social group of parents maybe finding that they're in the position to be able to lend a bit of money or guaranteeing the kids' loans. But what kind of pressure does that put on the family relationship? Dr. Julia Cook is a youth sociologist at the University of Newcastle. She's just received a big grant, around $370,000, to research what happens to families who enter into these kinds of arrangements.
Why are you interested in this area of study?
Well, I'm really interested in this area of study because it's such an active space of social change. So back in around about 2010, about 3% of first home buyers received financial help from their parents, and that's up to 60% now, about 10 years later. So it's a really fast-moving, fast-evolving area, and it's a very new social phenomena in many ways.
Right. So given how new it is and how quickly it's changing, do we know much about how these arrangements can affect relationships in the family?
Well, that's the really interesting thing. We have some emerging understanding of what happens at the specific time that money changes hands. So how these specific arrangements come about and how they influence people on a large scale. For instance, the people that receive money are more likely, obviously, to get into the property market. But we don't really have a very good sense of what happens down the track. All that we really do know is that both the kind of parents that give money and the children that receive money are more likely, disproportionately likely, to experience financial hardship after the money's changed hands. So we don't really know exactly why that happens, and we don't know what it means for their relationship. So that's really what I'm researching. I'm looking at what happens after money changes hands in the 18-month period following the transfer.
How are you going to do that research? You clearly need humans that have exchanged money to sign up.
Yes, I do. So I'm going to be focusing on Newcastle and Sydney as my two kind of field sites. Sydney for very obvious reasons. It's the kind of hottest housing market in the country at the moment. I'm sure you've seen the rise in median house prices there, which is quite extraordinary. And then Newcastle is quite interesting because obviously it's a regional market, but the cost of property has increased enormously in recent years. So we also see people from Sydney coming to Newcastle to try and buy property because they've been squeezed out of the Sydney market. So there's all these interesting additional pressures, making it quite an interesting site for analysis. And so I'm going to be focusing on 20 families in each location, so 20 families in Newcastle and 20 in Sydney, and I'm going to be speaking to them initially when the money changes hands or when they're kind of in the midst of that process, and then I'll speak to them 6 months down the line, and then another kind of year after that. So I'll be kind of talking to them for an 18-month period, and I'm going to be speaking to both the parents who are giving money and the children who are receiving money to see what that looks like from the two different perspectives.
What are the types of things you'll be wanting to know from them? Do you have specific questions in mind?
I think initially I would want to know essentially how the financial assistance came about. So I've done some preliminary research into this back in 2018. I was interested in how does this happen, or what does the kind of conversation look like? Is it that children are asking their parents for money, or is it that the parents are offering? And at that time, I found that for all of the people I spoke to, and I was only speaking to the children at this time, I found that very few of them had asked their parents for money, and that their parents had generally made the offer, but the offer didn't come kind of at the point at which they started looking for a property. It came at a point at which they started to struggle in their kind of efforts to find a property. So perhaps they went to an inspection with their parents, and the parents saw the kind of place their child could actually afford and thought, I don't want my child and my grandchildren living here. Or they would go along with the child to an auction and watch them get drastically outbidded. And then generally the offer of assistance would kind of come in to help them along at that point rather than being something that was understood from the outset.
Dr. Julia Cook there, a youth sociologist at the University of Newcastle.